New York City, January 8, 1943. On the 33rd floor of the Hotel New Yorker, a maid named Alice Monaghan pauses outside room 3327. A small sign hangs from the handle. Do not disturb. It has hung there for 2 days. Housekeeping has learned to respect it. The guest inside is old, private, and known to keep unusual hours. But 2 days is long enough. Alice lets herself in. She finds him in the bed, alone. In the plain furnished room he has called home for the last years of a long life. He has been dead since roughly 11:15 the previous night. A hotel physician is summoned, and within the hour a cause is written down: coronary thrombosis. A blocked vessel. A stopped heart. An ending as ordinary as any other, for a man who was anything but. His name is Nikola Tesla, 86 years old. A Serbian immigrant with over 100 patents to his name. A one-time friend of Mark Twain. The man whose alternating current now runs through nearly every wall in the country that had, for so long, forgotten him. He dies with almost no money, no family in the city, and, depending on who is asked, either nothing left to hide, or a locked safe and 80 steamer trunks of secrets that a government is already moving to seize. By the time his nephew reaches the room, someone else has already been there. What was taken, what was left, and what any of it actually contained would become one of the enduring unresolved questions of 20th century science. To understand why a dead man's hotel room drew the attention of the FBI, we have to go back 86 years to a mountain village in the Austrian Empire on a night lit by lightning. Welcome back to my channel. Hope you enjoyed today's journey. And let's get into it. Smiljan, in what is now Croatia, sits in the shadow of the Velebit Mountains. On the night of July 9th to 10th, 1856, a storm broke over the village so violent that the midwife attending the birth is said to have called the child unlucky, a child of the storm. His mother reportedly answered that he would instead be a child of light. The story is almost certainly embellished by decades of retelling. It is also, in hindsight, difficult to resist. Nikola was the fourth of 5 children born to Milutin Tesla, a Serbian Orthodox priest, and Duka Tesla, a woman with no formal schooling but a household reputation for mechanical ingenuity. She built her own tools and appliances by hand. Nikola would later credit his mother, not his father, as the origin of whatever gift he had for invention. The gift arrived early and strangely. Tesla could perform integral calculus in his head, a talent so unusual that teachers at his school in Karlovac accused him of cheating. He finished a 4-year course of study in 3. But alongside the calculation came something else, an eidetic memory that, by his own later account, bled into something closer to hallucination. Bright flashes of light would appear before his eyes, uninvited, often accompanying a word or an idea, blurring the line between what he perceived and what was actually in the room. In 1863, when Nikola was 7, his older brother Daniel was killed in a riding accident. Accounts differ on the details, but the effect on the family was severe, and on young Nikola in particular. Some biographers trace the intensification of his visions to the grief and shock of that year. He would grow up in his brother's shadow, aware that Daniel had been considered the more brilliant of the 2 sons, the one meant for greatness. The family relocated to the nearby town of Gospic in 1862, where his father took up a new parish. Nikola moved through primary and middle school there before being sent, in 1870, to the higher real gymnasium in Karlovac, where classes were conducted in German rather than his native Serbian. It was there, watching a physics teacher demonstrate static electricity to a room of bored teenagers, that something in him changed. He would later write that the demonstrations of this mysterious phenomenon made him want to know more of this wonderful force, a line that reads, in hindsight, like the opening sentence of the rest of his life. His father wanted him to enter the priesthood, continuing a family line of Orthodox clergy. Nikola had other plans, and voiced them poorly enough, or persistently enough, that the disagreement became a genuine rift between father and son. Then, after his gymnasium graduation in 1873, Tesla contracted cholera and was bedridden for 9 months, near death more than once. According to the story he told in his own memoirs decades later, he struck a bargain from his sickbed. If he lived, his father would let him study engineering instead of theology. He lived. His father agreed, and, not long after, sent him to enroll at the Austrian Polytechnic in the city of Graz. In 1875, Tesla enrolled at the Austrian Polytechnic in Graz to study mathematics and physics. His first year was flawless, model grades, relentless discipline, professors who took notice. Then something slipped. He developed a gambling habit that consumed both his money and his attention. His academic performance collapsed, and by his third year his scholarship had been withdrawn. He left Graz in 1878 without a degree, a fact he would spend years quietly concealing. His father died shortly afterward, and Tesla, displaced, grieving, and effectively broke, drifted to Prague, where he audited lectures at Charles Ferdinand University without ever formally enrolling. He would later describe this period in terms that sound, to modern ears, like a nervous breakdown, exhaustion, oversensitivity to light and sound, a mind that would not stop generating ideas even when the body demanded rest. It was in this unstable stretch of his 20s that the idea that would define his career arrived. After Prague, Tesla found work at a telegraph company in Budapest and was quickly promoted to chief electrician. Working there in 1882, he was walking through a city park with a friend, reciting poetry, when the solution to a problem he had been circling for years snapped into focus. A motor that used alternating current and a rotating magnetic field, requiring no sparking commutator at all. He is said to have sketched the design in the sand of the path with a stick. There was no laboratory, no funding, no audience, only an idea, fully formed, arriving the way his childhood visions had always arrived, uninvited, and entirely convincing to the one person who could see it. He carried the idea to Paris, where he took a job with the Continental Edison company, repairing and improving DC equipment for the same electrical empire whose founder he had never met. It would not be long before he crossed an ocean to meet him. In June of 1884, Tesla arrived in New York with, by his own account, 4 cents in his pocket, a book of poetry, and a letter of introduction from his supervisor in Paris, Charles Batchelor, addressed to Thomas Edison himself. The letter reportedly read, "I know 2 great men, and you are one of them. This young man is the other." Edison hired him. For a matter of months, the 2 men worked in close proximity, the self-taught American genius of practical invention, and the meticulously trained European engineer who thought in 3 dimensions and higher mathematics. Tesla later claimed Edison promised him $50,000 if he could redesign and improve the company's inefficient DC dynamos. Tesla did the work. When he asked for payment, Edison is said to have replied that Tesla simply didn't understand American humor. Whether the exact figure or the joke are accurate is disputed by historians, but the rupture that followed is not. Tesla resigned. The break came in 1887, when Tesla met 2 new investors willing to fund a laboratory built around his ideas rather than someone else's. He founded the Tesla Electric Company in Manhattan and, within months, filed the patents for his alternating current induction motor and polyphase power system, the technology that had waited 5 years since that walk through a Budapest park to become real. He filed roughly 30 patents in that single burst of work, an output so rapid that it drew the attention of the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, who invited him to present his findings in 1888. It was that lecture, more than any single invention before it, that finally put his name in front of the one man with both the capital and the appetite to build what Tesla had designed at scale. George Westinghouse, the Pittsburgh industrialist already competing with Edison to build America's power infrastructure, saw Tesla's 1888 lecture to the American Institute of Electrical Engineers and understood immediately what he was looking at. He licensed Tesla's AC patents, paid him for the rights, and gave him a laboratory. It was, on paper, the deal that should have made Tesla one of the wealthiest men in America. Edison did not intend to lose the current war quietly. Direct current was safer at a distance but far more expensive to distribute over long ranges, requiring power stations every mile or so. Alternating current could travel much farther on much less copper, but at far higher, and, Edison argued, far more lethal voltages. Edison's camp ran a public campaign to brand AC as a killer, privately funding demonstrations in which stray animals were electrocuted with alternating current in front of the press. In 1890, that campaign reached its grimmest expression. New York State, at the quiet urging of an Edison associate, executed a convicted murderer using an AC-powered electric chair, intending the spectacle to prove Westinghouse's system was too dangerous for American homes. It did not work. In 1893, Westinghouse and Tesla won the contract to light the world's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, illuminating the fairgrounds with more bulbs than existed in the rest of the city combined. A public demonstration of AC's safety and superiority that Edison's smear campaign could not undo. That same partnership then won the contract to harness Niagara Falls, and by 1896 alternating current, carrying Tesla's name on dozens of the patents behind it, was powering the city of Buffalo. The war of currents was over. Tesla had not merely won an argument about electricity. His signature was now on the standard the entire world would come to use. There is one further detail from this period that biographers return to again and again, because it captures something essential about Tesla's relationship with money. His original contract with Westinghouse entitled him to a royalty on every horsepower of AC electricity sold, a rate that, as the system spread across the country, would eventually have made him one of the richest men in America. When Westinghouse Company hit a genuine financial crisis in the early 1890s and creditors threatened to take control, Westinghouse came to Tesla and explained that honoring the royalty contract could sink the company entirely. According to the story Tesla himself later told, he took the contract and tore it up on the spot, giving up what would have amounted to millions of dollars to save the one backer who had believed in his invention. Whether the gesture was entirely selfless or partly self-interested, Westinghouse's survival was also Tesla's best remaining path to relevance. It left him, for the rest of his life, without the fortune his invention alone should have guaranteed him. Victory made Tesla famous, and fame made him theatrical. Where Edison sold reliability, Tesla sold spectacle. And at the Chicago Fair he became, briefly, the most talked-about man in American science, passing hundreds of thousands of volts of high-frequency current through his own body to illuminate lamps he held in his bare hands, proving to an audience raised on Edison's warnings that alternating current, handled correctly, need not kill at all. Away from the stage, Tesla kept a small circle of close friends, the writer Mark Twain among them, a frequent visitor to Tesla's laboratory through the 1890s, present in 1894 when Tesla photographed him under one of the first pictures ever lit entirely by phosphorescent light. It was one of the few relationships in Tesla's life built on companionship rather than funding, spectacle, or correspondence. In 1895, disaster struck. A fire tore through his Manhattan laboratory, destroying years of notes, prototypes, and equipment. An irreplaceable archive of unfinished work reduced to ash in a single night. It was the second time in his career that a fire had erased years of labor, and Tesla, by his own later account, never fully recovered the momentum of ideas that had existed only in those burned notebooks. He rebuilt anyway, financing new equipment through whatever licensing income and investor goodwill remained to him. And by 1898 he was ready for his next spectacle, a small, unmanned boat, radio-controlled from a distance, demonstrated before a skeptical crowd at Madison Square Garden. Many in the audience assumed it was a trick, a hidden operator, a trained animal, anything but what Tesla claimed it to be, one of the earliest working demonstrations of wireless remote control in history, dismissed by the very public it was built to impress. That dismissal stung. Tesla had already begun to suspect that the future belonged not to any single motor or lamp, but to the wireless transmission of both signal and power, the idea that would consume the rest of his working life and the rest of his fortune. In 1899, funded in part by the fire insurance money and eager for open space and privacy, Tesla built an experimental station in Colorado Springs, far from the crowded competition of New York. There he constructed his magnifying transmitter, a coil capable of generating artificial lightning bolts over 100 feet long, and, by some accounts, of drawing enough current from the local power grid to occasionally black out the town of Colorado Springs itself. It was in this remote laboratory, working largely alone, that Tesla made one of his strangest and most contested claims. Monitoring his equipment one night, he recorded rhythmic electrical signals he could not explain by any terrestrial source he knew of. He speculated, in print, that he might be receiving communication of extraterrestrial origin, signals from Mars. The scientific community's response ranged from polite skepticism to open ridicule. Later analysis has suggested a far more mundane explanation: interference from the newly emerging science of radio transmission elsewhere on the planet, picked up by an instrument sensitive enough to hear signals nobody yet knew how to send. But at the time, no one, least of all Tesla, could be certain. What is not in dispute is the ambition behind the Colorado Springs experiments. Tesla was no longer interested merely in improving the delivery of electricity through wires. He had begun to believe the Earth itself could act as a conductor, and that with a large enough transmitter, both electrical power and information could be broadcast wirelessly to any point on the globe, for a fraction of the cost of the wired infrastructure that had made him and Westinghouse rich. It was a vision decades ahead of its time, and one that would require far more money than Tesla had left to bring into being. He left Colorado Springs in 1900, his experimental notebooks full of observations that ranged from rigorous to nearly mystical, his local reputation somewhere between visiting genius and dangerous nuisance to the town's power supply. He would spend the rest of his career trying, and largely failing, to secure funding on the scale that his Colorado ambitions actually required. But the core conviction he carried away from that mountain laboratory, that power and information alike could ride the Earth itself wirelessly to any point on the map, would follow him back to New York and into the single most consequential gamble of his career. Back in New York in 1900, Tesla found his financier, J.P. Morgan, who agreed to put up roughly $150,000 for what Tesla pitched as a global wireless communication system, the transmission of stock quotes, news, and private messages across the Atlantic without a single undersea cable. Privately, Tesla hoped it would become something far larger, a global wireless power system as well, broadcasting electricity itself to any receiver on Earth, no wires required. He did not share the full scope of that second ambition with his primary investor. Construction began at Wardenclyffe on Long Island, and a 187-foot tower, crowned with an enormous dome-shaped terminal designed by the architect Stanford White, began to rise against the sky. Then, in December 1901, Guglielmo Marconi transmitted a Morse code signal across the Atlantic from England to Newfoundland using a comparatively modest apparatus, achieving, at a fraction of the cost, the basic wireless communication milestone Tesla had promised Morgan as only the first phase of a far grander vision. Tesla always maintained that Marconi's work relied on his own patented technology, and history would eventually side with him. The U.S. Supreme Court voided several of Marconi's key patents in 1943, months after Tesla's death, citing Tesla's earlier claims. But in 1901, that vindication was 40 years away, and utterly useless to him. Morgan, seeing a rival achieve basic wireless transmission for almost nothing, refused to fund Tesla's larger ambitions any further, and politely declined every subsequent request for additional capital. Wardenclyffe stalled, half-built, mortgaged against debts Tesla could no longer repay. He was foreclosed on, just as he had once lost his Colorado Springs equipment to creditors. The same pattern of visionary construction followed by financial collapse that would repeat through nearly every major project of his life. During the First World War, government suspicion, fed by rumors that the abandoned, oddly shaped tower on Long Island was somehow being used to signal German U-boats offshore, contributed to the site's fate. In 1917, the tower Tesla had built to speak wirelessly to the entire planet was dynamited and sold for scrap to help settle his mounting debts. Tesla did not attend the demolition. He was already, by then, a man more talked about than believed. The following 2 decades were quieter, poorer, and stranger. Tesla moved between New York hotels, the St. Regis, the Governor Clinton, eventually the New Yorker, often leaving unpaid bills behind him, settled quietly by well-placed friends or by Westinghouse itself, which continued a discreet stipend for the man whose name was on its foundational patents. He held onto a small circle of confidants, the writers Robert Underwood Johnson and Francis Marion Crawford, alongside the memory of Twain. Financially, he remained, by every account, hopeless, brilliant with electrical systems and disastrous with money. And he formed an attachment, unmistakably genuine and often described in his own words with startling intensity, to the pigeons he fed daily in the parks of Manhattan. One white pigeon in particular, which he later said he loved as a man loves a woman, and whose death he described as the moment something in him ended. He never married, and seemed, by every account from those close to him, to have made peace with a solitude that had less to do with any single romance lost than with a life built almost entirely around work. He continued, until nearly the end, to make claims to the press that outpaced anything he could demonstrate. In 1934, and again around his birthday in 1940, Tesla announced a weapon he called Teleforce, quickly nicknamed the Death Ray by newspapers, a particle beam he claimed could destroy an invading army 200 miles away or bring down a fleet of 10,000 aircraft at 250. He never demonstrated it. He never fully explained how it worked. He did, according to later declassified documents, send diagrams and proposals to the US War Department, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and Yugoslavia, a global broadcast of an idea that may or may not have existed anywhere outside his own notebooks. Even as his fortunes shrank, Tesla's appetite for prediction did not. In January 1926, at the age of 69, he sat for a wide-ranging interview with the journalist John B. Kennedy, published in Collier's magazine under the attention-grabbing title When Woman is Boss. Buried inside a piece more concerned with Tesla's forecasts about the rise of women in public life was a description of a wireless future so specific that it would still be circulating, quoted and requoted, nearly a century later. Tesla told Kennedy that once wireless technology matured, the whole planet would function as a single connected system, letting people communicate across any distance with a clarity equal to standing face to face, and that the device making this possible would eventually be simple enough and small enough to carry in an ordinary pocket. Read in 1926, alongside bulky radio sets and telephones still tied to walls by cords, it sounded like fantasy. Read 100 years later, in a world where a Collier's reader's descendants carry exactly such a device everywhere they go, it reads like a diagram of what actually happened. Not every prediction from that interview aged as well. Tesla also foresaw fuel-free flying machines that would make transatlantic crossings a matter of hours and dissolve international borders in the process, a vision of wireless-powered aircraft that never arrived, tangled up with a broader, more troubling strand of his later thinking that leaned on the era's fashionable, now discredited theories about selectively engineering the human race. Tesla was, in this sense, a man of his own contradictions, a mind that could sketch the outline of the smartphone decades before the transistor existed, sitting inside the same imagination that embraced some of the 20th century's ugliest pseudoscience without apparent friction between the two. It is this combination, extraordinary, verifiable foresight running alongside claims that ranged from unproven to unfounded, that makes Tesla's late career so difficult to summarize cleanly. He was neither simply the misunderstood genius of popular legend nor simply the washed-up eccentric his critics preferred. He was both, often within the same magazine interview, and the death ray claims that would consume his final years grew out of exactly this soil, a reputation for being right about the impossible, planted decades earlier, that he never stopped trying to harvest one more time. By the winter of 1943, Tesla was 86, alone, and living on a small allowance in a single room at the Hotel New Yorker. On the evening of January 7th, at approximately 11:15, his heart stopped. No one was present. The Do Not Disturb sign that had become part of his daily routine bought him 2 more days of undisturbed privacy and death that he had spent much of his life cultivating in life. Alice Monahan found him on the morning of the 8th. His nephew, Sava Kozanovic, at the time serving as a Yugoslav diplomatic official in Washington, arrived at the hotel soon after and later reported a strong suspicion that Tesla's room had already been searched before he got there, that papers and a safe had been gone through by someone with access, and with an interest in what an aging, penniless inventor might have been sitting on. That suspicion was not paranoia. Within days, the U.S. government's Office of Alien Property Custodian, acting on instructions that historians attribute to the FBI and to wartime anxiety over Tesla's death ray claims, moved to seize every document, notebook, and trunk connected to him, an estimated 80 trunks in total, distributed across a hotel safe, a storage basement, and scattered warehouses around Manhattan. The justification hinged on Kozanovic's Yugoslav government ties, at a moment when Yugoslavia's alignment in the war was still a live concern for American intelligence. Tesla's 50 years as a naturalized American citizen were, in practice, set aside. An MIT electrical engineer named John G. Trump, uncle to a future American president, was assigned to review the seized papers for any genuine military value. His conclusion, delivered in a report to the Office of Alien Property, was that the material was, in his words, speculative and philosophical rather than technical, containing nothing that amounted to new, workable scientific principles. On paper, the death ray was declared a myth, and the matter should have ended there. It did not entirely end there, even within the government's own ranks. Some military officers took a different view of Tesla's ideas than Trump's dismissive report suggested. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, a group that reportedly included Brigadier General L.C. Craigie, one of the first men to fly a jet aircraft for the U.S. military, argued that the underlying particle beam concept had genuine merit, whatever the state of Tesla's own unfinished designs. The government, in other words, was never fully unified in its assessment of the old man's last invention. One office called it fantasy, while officers elsewhere quietly wondered if there was something real underneath it. Decades later, some historians would trace an intellectual line from Tesla's Teleforce claims to the particle beam research folded into the Reagan administration's Strategic Defense Initiative in the 1980s, a speculative thread, but not an absurd one. For years afterward, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI fielded a slow trickle of letters from researchers, journalists, and Tesla enthusiasts demanding to know what had happened to the papers, some of them convinced, based on an unverified claim in a 1944 biography, that the Bureau itself was sitting on Tesla's most dangerous designs. Internal correspondence, later declassified, shows the FBI and the Office of Alien Property largely at a loss to answer these letters with any certainty, each pointing inquiries toward the other. It was not until the file was substantially declassified, decades later, that the public could see for itself just how much uncertainty had existed inside the government's own paperwork. 6 months after Tesla's death, in a case that had nothing directly to do with him, the U.S. Supreme Court invalidated several of Guglielmo Marconi's foundational radio patents, ruling, in effect, that Tesla's earlier work had priority all along. The recognition he had chased for 40 years arrived only after he was no longer alive to hear it. The rest of his legacy accumulated slowly and then all at once. The unit of magnetic flux density bears his name. Alternating current remains the electrical standard of the world he helped wire together. In 1994, the city that once let him work as a ditch digger installed a street sign near his old laboratory, Nikola Tesla Corner. Decades later, an electric car company would carry his name into a future he had tried, and largely failed, to fund into existence himself. It is worth remembering, too, that almost none of this recognition reached him while he was alive to spend it. He died with debts, not royalties, with a hotel room, not a laboratory, with a handful of friends and a devotion to pigeons that outsiders found easier to mock than to understand. The gap between what Tesla contributed to the 20th century and what the 20th century gave back to him while he lived is, in its own way, as strange a mystery as anything in his sealed trunks. What remains unresolved is not his contribution. That case closed itself, eventually, on the strength of physics rather than public opinion. What remains unresolved is the man behind the seized trunks. Whether the death ray was a real design he never finished, or a phantom he half believed into being to stay relevant in his own newspapers. Whether the missing 20 trunks held genuine secrets or simply vanished in the ordinary carelessness of a wartime bureaucracy. Whether a mind capable of sketching the AC motor from a walk in a park was, by the end, still building things the rest of the world hadn't caught up to yet, or was simply an old man, alone with his pigeons, writing letters to governments about weapons that existed only on paper. Nikola Tesla spent his life turning invisible forces, electricity, radio waves, the rotating field inside a motor, into something the world could see and use. In death, he became something the world could not quite see at all, a locked safe, a disputed report, 20 trunks that never arrived. Perhaps that is the fitting last current running through his story. A man who spent his career insisting the future was already knowable, leaving behind an ending that, 80 years on, still isn't. This is the end of our journey for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you join us in the next journey. Stay tuned.